Vítáme vás u dalšího dílu podcastu Insider, který tentokrát moderuji jenom já, Michal Půr, a kolega Tomáš Jirsa se válí někde na pláži, takže za něj musím říct i ten obvyklý začátek. Partnerem tohoto podcastu je American Academy, americká mezinárodní základní a střední škola v Praze, projektová výuka, zahraniční učitelé, výuka STEM a studium pouze v angličtině. Partnerem je i úžasná advokátní kancelář ROWAN LEGAL. Připomínám, že každou středu můžete poslouchat náš nový formát Insider Briefing a je vás skutečně hodně, kteří tak činí. Celé díly Insideru najdete na Patreonu, Hero Gazetistu a najdete tam i balíček s novým světem. Dnešní host je velmi speciální a zůstáváme v angličtině, kde jsme už byli s Alexem Youngerem, bývalým šéfem MI6. A našimi hosty jsou Bret Weinstein a Heather Heying. It's good to have you here.
So good to be here with you in Prague.
It's an honor.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I will speak in Czech about something. I will say something about you. Oba manželé jsou evoluční biologové, kteří se zaměřují na širokou škálu témat prostřednictvím evoluční perspektivy. Přednášeli na Evergreen State College. We will talk about that later. Ale rezignovali na své pozice na akademické půdě v reakci na kontroverzní studentské rasové protesty, které zasáhly kampus. Tomu se dostaneme. Oba jsou častými hosty podcastu Joe Rogena, Sama Harrise. Do popředí pozornosti se dostali také díky kontroverzním postojům k vakcínám proti COVID-19. Jsou častými řečníky na téma svobody slova a boje proti politické korektnosti a cancel culture. Tak, já teď přepnu do angličtiny. Do you want me to translate it?
I think we were able. There were enough
Sam Harris, Joe Rogan,
yes.
Evergreen
State College, cancel culture. Yes.
So I know that you are a few days in Prague. How do you like it?
Fantastic, and in many ways, it is providing us with a kind of hope that we have not had in some time, because it appears that in the Czech Republic there is a functioning ethos of the West, which is in so many other places falling apart. So even to discover a culture where people appear to remain committed to a cosmopolitan tolerance is a truly positive sign.
It may not be obvious to people within the Czech Republic how unusual this feels. And it's possible that we are not worldly enough at the moment, but certainly the United States does not feel like this now. This feels like a good city in the United States 30 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, so I hope Prague will be New York or something like the 90s.
Yes, exactly.
That's true, because I spoke to a lot of my friends who didn't know that Czech Republic means primarily freedom. You can do whatever you want, you can say whatever you want. Actually, you can release a book whatever you want. And it's something for sure in the West or in the United States. How it is possible?
Well, I think
what happened actually.
We have been grappling with the question of what happened in light of the discovery that the West appears to continue to function here, of all places. And what we are realizing is that something has obviously overtaken the West in the countries that we traditionally associate with that term. I think what it is unfettered capitalism. And it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with capitalism. Markets are by far the best mechanism at our disposal to figure out how to do things. But across the West, we have allowed markets to dictate what it is that we should want to accomplish. And this is a terrible error. And the problem is that our institutions are not robust to such a powerful force. And they have essentially, without exception, caved to the pressures that come from the market. And they are now delivering us prescriptions that are not in the interest of the public. Why it didn't happen here, I suspect that is a story that involves the influence of the Iron Curtain, which, while it was obviously a profoundly negative thing, does seem to have protected a style of independent thought from the excesses of the market, maybe long enough that this is really the best example we have left on Earth. It's at least the best example that we are aware of.
Certainly in comparison to the United States, where we didn't go through a period where we felt that we were going to lose it. And so we've just been growing in complacency and softness for a long time. And it was at risk here for real for a long time. And the flame was kept alive. And I think there is such value in hardship and in the recognition that thing that you value so highly could be taken from you. And so you must defend it.
Yeah, we've lost freedom for 40 years and we've lost market
Mm-hmm.
also. As I said, you left the Evergreen College. You are both evolution biologists. Is it biologists? Yes. Is it a better life after you've left? Because you are on your own. I was just reading your curriculum, and you are on your own for many years. You started in some podcasts. You have a Dark Horse, very well-known podcast. Is it better or is it worse?
Well, it's different, and there are things in both categories. One of the things that was lost from the story of what happened at Evergreen was that we had a marvelous situation as professors that exists nowhere else in the academy, because the people who founded the college threw out all of the normal structures of a university, and they replaced them. And some of what they did didn't work, but some of what they did was quite brilliant. So we taught full-time. Students took one class full-time so that we were constantly with each other, and it meant that we knew our students in a way that professors don't anywhere else, and we were able to teach. We had the liberty to teach literally anything we wanted in any way we wanted. That level of freedom allowed us to push the outside of the envelope, to discover what was possible in the classroom that we wouldn't have been able to do at a standard college. So we missed that profoundly. On the other hand, the way that we left Evergreen has placed us in contact with a very vibrant world in which people are struggling with the most important issues of the day. And so our lives after Evergreen have been full of a kind of meaning, but we have lost the tremendously valuable teaching environment that we once had.
And in some ways, it's not unlike the topic we were just talking about. We had security. We were tenured. With tenure, you have a job for life. And we had jobs for life at a college that was unlike any other college. And so we had freedom to explore ideas, the likes of which most faculty don't at least feel that they have that freedom. Well, that security was a ruse. It was a lie, right? So discovering that where you think you have safety and security isn't actually there, to be, hurled out into a landscape that you never thought you would have to be scrappy in again, that you would never have to engage in again, reveals a lot about yourself, but also the people around you. The number of people who we never knew before who came out and said, "You're right, and let me hear more from you," was extraordinary. And the number of people whom we thought were friends who remained silent and protected themselves was also remarkable. So the revealing parts of what happened at Evergreen with regard to human nature, both good and bad, was something I wouldn't give up. And given that it is true about human nature, I'd rather know. As ugly as it is, I'd rather know than not know.
Do you feel insecure? And I will add something that's very interesting, because when I've heard that you will come to Prague and you will be the host of our podcast, I was pretty amazed. And everyone was like, wow, come on, these American celebrities coming to Prague. We all listened to Joe Rogan podcast, to Lex Friedman, to your Dark Horse podcast. And when we look at the social networks, That's a completely different picture. So come on, that's Weinstein, this disinformator, misinformations. When you see your profile on Wikipedia, there is this controversy, as they say it, and he's like spreading some misinformation about vaccines. Do you feel insecure? Because it's about the safe space you have in your life.
There is, permit me for speaking in the abstract, there is clearly a force. We don't understand in detail what it is composed of, but it is a force that opposes our ability to discuss important issues carefully in public. And Heather and I have violated its rules about which we were never consulted. So it has set about attempting to destroy our reputations, attempting to limit our reach, and in some ways it is most important. It has interfered very directly in our capacity to earn. We are no longer tenured professors. We depend entirely on revenue that comes from what we bring to the world in the sphere of social media, as authors of books. And there's clearly an organized campaign to cause people to imagine that there is something wrong with us, such that if they entertain what it is we say, that they are at risk of being found deficient. Now, we have a core audience that knows better than this. They've listened to us longer, and they are immune to these stigmas. But the degree to which our potential audience is reduced and our capacity to provide safety for our family is diminished, this is an important consideration. So, do we feel insecure? In one way, absolutely. There's no way to overcome this force entirely. On the other hand, what does appear to work is being completely genuine and authentic with the audience. People who are paying attention know that these stigmas are inaccurate. And so it's a bit of this and a bit of that. We obviously financially we are in some ways at their mercy, but in terms of the health of our social environment, it's full of very strong people who know better than to listen.
Heather?
I will say what the experience at Evergreen revealed is that we were at their mercy all along, and that now we have more autonomy, and we can see more clearly to what degree we are at the mercy of outside forces. To take it very far away from the abstract, as Evergreen was melting down around us, our children were 11 and 13. We have 2 boys. And our 11-year-old at dinner one day said, "Are we going to be homeless?" It was that level of chaos, and we knew that we come from homes such that we would not become homeless. We were protected from that level of disruption. But the fact that a crazed mob should create such insecurity in the mind of an 11-year-old, such that he was actually concerned that we were going to lose everything and be on the streets, was a moment for me of realizing we can never give a crazed mob that much power over our family again. What we're doing now with the book, with the podcast, with the other writing, with the other podcasts, is in some ways very much like what we were doing in the classroom. Like, we have been scientists and evolutionary biologists for a very long time. And although we have done the work in different venues, everything from the Amazon rainforest to here in your studio, the work has been from the beginning. My job as your professor, my job as someone speaking to you, is not to make you comfortable. As your parent, my job as anything interacting with you is not to make you comfortable, is not to reinforce your preconceptions, is not to inform you of your own biases and feed them back to you so that you're happy, but to push on the things that you haven't investigated yet, to learn from you the things that I don't know, and for us to together realize a better model of the world such that we can together make it better. We did that successfully in the classroom. It's different out here in the sort of wild west of non-academia, but in some ways, the work hasn't changed. And I think that has been a problem for those who would write our Wikipedia pages and demonetize us on YouTube and such. Because as it turns out, we're consistent and authentic, and we are what we appear to be, despite what the naysayers would say.
After the 7th of October, the attacks in Israel, I think everybody can see that there is something wrong with U.S. universities. We saw some petitions from Harvard. It's like crazy anti-Semite thing. From the Czech point of view, it appears to me that times are changing a little bit. There's a strong reaction against the behavior you've talked about. Is it true? Do you feel it the same way?
Yes, but it is frustrating because this should have been obvious years ago. We faced our situation at Evergreen in 2017. And we were very clear with people. The temptation was to look at it and say, this is an extremely liberal college. It's a fascinating situation, but it's not representative. And we were very clear with the world, no, this is a preview of what's coming. And we also tried to point out that the institutions, the scientific institutions inside of universities, the universities themselves, the newspapers, the government, were all dysfunctional. And that as long as things looked relatively peaceful, people were not able to see it. They are now beginning to recognize the level of dysfunction, and they are beginning to extrapolate about all of the people who have graduated from these broken universities with their broken ideas and have infused every single institution on which society depends. So I'm glad that they're waking up, but we can't continue to wake up so late. Many of these things are visible ahead, and it is time for us to recognize the danger that we are in.
Heather, do you feel it that something is changing?
I think October 7th revealed to the world something that, well, Bret in particular was sensing for a very long time, but was clear in, again, I can only speak to American academia, but I think all of Western academia, has been the case at least since the early 90s. It's beyond having created fake fields and having people graduate in fields in which they learned nothing. The fields that are real and ancient and are about true knowledge, the sciences, philosophy, the arts, the humanities, all of these actually real fields have stopped making sense. And if the meaning makers, if the intellectuals, the people in the media and politics and government and medicine and law are all coming out of the institutions, and the institutions are teaching, it's not neutral garbage. It's not that these people are ending up uneducated. It's that people are ending up anti-educated. Then what hope can there be, right? So I think...
And how did that happen? Because what's the start? What's the beginning?
Well, it's funny. Heather and I have been together a very long time, and we were, in fact, we graduated together from the University of California, Santa Cruz. The first time we encountered this style of thinking was as students ourselves, and it was not yet dominant in the universities. It was confined to certain fields, but those fields were not entirely social sciences. We encountered it actually in paleontology and anthropology. So I think the story, it's a little oversimplified, but the story is basically that fields were created to give a playground to a political faction, and that this created a mechanism for idea laundering, that bad ideas were given the veneer of scientific legitimacy by the creation of fields that superficially looked as if they were practicing some sort of method. But because those fields were ones in which students could go and they could graduate with a degree that sounded meaningful without actually doing difficult work, it became more and more dominant inside the academy. And at some point, the number of people who were downstream of these attractive but incorrect ideas had enough control that they effectively staged a coup, and they started dictating terms to the true sciences. And that's where we are now.
And I think this is a little arcane maybe, but how is it that what Bret is calling the true sciences, the natural sciences and the physical sciences, were allowed to become overcome? Like, how did they lose voice? This was due to perverse financial incentives from the grants, where you can only do science in modern times if you get big federal grants in the United States. And the universities take such a large percentage out of every grant that the universities want you to do expensive science if you're a scientist. They win when their faculty do expensive science rather than cost-effective science. They get more money for themselves. And so what you started having was incentives for faculty to mostly become grant writers rather than do the other work of the university like governance. And so you have scientists pulling back from doing governance and teaching and leaving that to the people who weren't getting grants, which was in many of these made-up fields, and they came to run the universities. And the scientists then also became less science-y because they were mostly about being bureaucrats, getting money from the government.
There is a huge difference between to be a professor in the Czech Republic and a professor in the United States, that if you are a professor in the Czech Republic, you are a professor for life. So nothing can change it. In the United States, you can be a professor and then day after you are nothing, I would say. And all the professors in the Czech Republic are the public intellectuals, I would say. Who are the public intellectuals now back in America?
Well, the first thing I want to point out is that when we so publicly were forced from our jobs at the college, we adopted a term for ourselves, professors in exile. It is an allusion to exactly the point that you are making. We did not change at the point that our university could no longer tolerate our open minds. We were the same people with the same things to teach, and the fact that we had no institution didn't alter that.
Yeah.
So what I would say is there is a danger that there are a great many people masquerading as public intellectuals who aren't. The key distinction, the thing that one must track, the sine qua non, is the use of first principles thinking. The ability to extrapolate from an incomplete set of information to a model of the world that is useful. And you know it is useful if it predicts ahead of time events that are not predicted by competing models. That's the question. If your public intellectuals are continually behind in terms of they're simply describing the world they see, but they cannot predict what's coming, they aren't real. And who are they? I would say the lesson of the last 6 years is that you often have people who are accurate in one realm, but when the public mind focuses on a new topic, suddenly they fail. That's an indicator that this is a person whose model is at the very best extremely limited, and possibly it's just a matter of tapping into the zeitgeist. You want people who can predict ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Do you agree?
I do.
Because the public intellectual for me is someone who has expertise or profession. He's a professional or she is a professional in terms of physics, philosophy, mathematics, and so on. And now it's always about, oh, come on, he's an expert in IT. He's an anthropologist. He's something. Do you agree?
Well, I want to push back in one way. The institutions are so broken and have been for so long that many people who are the natural public intellectuals of our time simply couldn't put up with the system, and they did not end up with a degree in the field that you might expect. So the name of our podcast is Dark Horse.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, it's an allusion to the character, to the phenomenon in the Benjamin Disraeli book, The Young Duke. The dark horse is a horse that has been trained in secret, and you don't know its capacity. You don't know how to bet on it. So we are routinely running into people who are not coming from fields where you would expect them, but demonstrate very high capacity to think carefully and critically. So beware. You may have public intellectuals who do not look as you would expect them. The real question is, do they see with clarity that you can detect over time?
I would just add, there are a few points on which Bret and I disagree, and I would defend the idea of the liberal arts and sciences, as what higher education is supposed to be about, in which you are pursuing truth and beauty, but mostly truth, through a variety of means. And that is being replaced in many places by either a pursuit of something else entirely that we can't even define with most of these fields, these new fields, or with something of obvious practical value. So something like technology, which we need people who understand how to innovate in and maintain technology, but it is not the same as being a scientist. And so, the acronym in English, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, is important. Too often we find schools, people, institutions thinking that TEM is the same and just as valuable, that if we lose the science and we just keep the technology and the engineering and the math, which is foundational and is necessary, that it'll be good enough. But if we only privilege the people who are focused on solving a particular practical problem, as opposed to including the scientists who are asking questions about the natural world, whether or not there is understood to be in advance some human value in it, then we're going to cut ourselves off at the knees. We need scientists first. Technology and engineering have to come from the science rather than the other way around.
True. How do you see the future? Because the future of higher education, because there's so much bias on the universities that there's almost no hope that something will happen, something good will happen.
I think this is a place where people they're not going to like the answer. The answer is that the rot inside of the academy is so advanced that it is a system that cannot be rescued. Now, ultimately, inside of this system, you have campuses that have the right infrastructure to do the job. What you don't have are people who are wise enough to perform it. You don't have enough people to staff these institutions with faculty capable of actually enlightening students. So that is a critical problem, and it's not one for which there is an obvious solution. It's the kind of thing that will be solved over the course of a couple generations if we start right now. And if we don't, it will be delayed several generations. So the ultimate lesson here is, when we solve this problem, we must never again allow this to crop up. The people who were so dismissive of the rot inside of the institutions, when those of us who had seen it tried to alert their attention, those people are the reason that there is no good answer to that question now. And we must listen in the future as people are trying to warn us that the institutions have been captured and corrupted.
Heather.
Yeah. At least in the U.S., the current faculty are largely too broken to be fixed, I think. And we've both been involved in some initiatives to try to either fix higher ed or rebuild it from the ashes, phoenix the university. And the problem, as I see it, has often been there's plenty of student demand. There is a whole generation of people who are having a hard time for sure and may not know some very basic things about reality, but are eager for a real opportunity to real education. There will be no trouble filling an amazing new university with students. But where are we going to get the faculty? Because the faculty were all trained in the 90s, the aughts, the teens, when the rise of these grievance studies disciplines and those faculty were in the administrations of those universities, such that we now have a faculty that's almost entirely trained in things that aren't real.
And I would just add one more thing, which is, to the extent that there are people on these faculties who know better, who have never bought the nonsense, they know that there are two sexes, they know that 2 and 2 equals 4.
But they are silent.
They are silent. And so what you have is a system that has trained people to become cowards. We have an epidemic of cowardice in the academy. And so if you were to liberate the academy, presumably those who retain their capacity to think would still be there to teach. But what would they be teaching? At a values level, they've already indicted themselves.
Děkujeme, že jste doposlouchali Insider. až sem, pokud chcete slyšet i zbytek podcastu, tak za malý poplatek, tak můžete učinit na platformách Patreon nebo Hero, anebo také Gazetisto. Na Patreonu si můžete koupit Insider i v balíčku s novým světem. A my jsme s Bretem Weinsteinem a Heather Heyingovou probrali třeba ještě americkou politiku, jak vidí prezidentské volby, komu fandí a nejsou to republikáni jako překvapení. Proč si myslí, že Donald Trump není člověk na svém místě? Co si myslí o Elonu Muskovi, se kterým se osobně setkali, o Jordanu Petersonovi, o Samu Harrisovi a jejich velkému fightu vzájemnému. Probrali jsme i vakcíny na COVID. Bret Weinstein bývá označován jako velký antivaxer. Najdete to i na Wikipedii, tak na to jsem se ho také ptal. Můžete zhodnotit sami. Byla to velmi zajímavá debata a buďme rádi, že si takovou tady můžeme ještě udělat. Děkujeme vám za pozornost a pozor, 27.10. vychází jejich knížka Průvodce lovce sběrače po 21. století. Není to špatné, já jsem to čet, tak zkuste to taky. Díky a mějte se hezky.